5:30 for a meeting I've got to attend here at work, but I do appreciate everybody joining, and I know we've got some materials we need to cover. It doesn't look like a lengthy agenda. It depends on how much discussion we have as to whether we get through it anyway in the next hour or so. But I guess first order of business is the minutes. I know that were sent out by Kathleen. I know I reviewed those. I thought they looked good. I'd ask if the group is comfortable, if I could get a motion to accept those.
So moved.
All right.
Seconded.
All right. Any opposed?
Who seconded? I'm sorry.
I can second.
That would be.
I'm going with Sue because I saw her. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, very good. So I guess the next item of business is Affordable Housing Coalition update. And it looks like Devin Montgomery is going to provide that for us. So Devin?
It's actually Derwin.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm looking at the screen. It's so small. I can't read it. Sorry.
All right.
It's okay. Thanks, Derwin, for joining us today.
I'm off, am I?
Yep.
Yeah.
You're good
Okay.
now.
Good morning, everyone. For many folks, may already be familiar with some of the work of the Affordable Housing Coalition, but Zach's just to kind of brief folks on the work that Affordable Housing Coalition has been done, and in doing so, just want to kind of give you all just some historic context for the Affordable Housing Coalition. So the Affordable Housing Coalition came out of the City Council's efforts and focus on work around housing, the challenges of creating and sustaining affordable housing. So the City Council commissioned a housing study to be able to give some hard data around what does it look like, what is our housing stock, what are the entry points of housing in the community, and to identify gaps in that housing. And so within that housing study, you've probably heard many people kind of quote some of the numbers of 15,000 units, 16,000 units in need of housing. And that's reality for actually just a portion of the need in the city. That's the need and the demand that exists for individuals 80% and below, and the majority of those units are needed for individuals that are 50% and below. So it's a very comprehensive analysis of housing in the city. It's actually on the city's website, if folks want to be able to read it if you haven't read it, and that is the housing study. Out of that housing study, the council then created the Affordable Housing Coalition to take the lead on taking recommendations out of that housing study and then shape some recommendations back to council. And then serve as a core lead in the community in helping to bring folks together. There were 4 specific items that the coalition were asked to look at in terms of recommendations. Recommendations should, 1, expand affordable housing opportunities, engage supporters and advocates for affordable housing, coordinate and secure sustainable resources for affordable housing, and advise the Winston-Salem City Council on the use of funds to support affordable housing development. Were the 4 core items that the coalition has been tasked with. His work started at that time. I was on the council, and I was chairing the community development committee when we were doing that work. And since transitioning into the General Assembly, was appointed to chair the Affordable Housing Coalition, actually co-chair the Affordable Housing Coalition. And so, as you can imagine, COVID has played a tremendous negative impact thus far in some of our work this year. We were originally planning and still on course to make some final recommendations in terms of the strategies to the City Council at the end of the year. We're still working to do that. That's the goal, to be able to make those recommendations to the City Council by the end of the year. From there, the work of the coalition does shift to the operationalizing of those recommendations. But these are the, let's say, 10 recommendations we have on the creation of affordable housing, additional tools that we'll need to do. From that moment, the work then shifts to the place of, well, how do we do this? And pulling all of the partners in the community necessary to be able to make sure that we can corral the resources necessary to do it, whether it's advocacy on one side to reinstate a quarter-cent sales tax that city used to have to be directed just to affordable housing development, whether it's the support and the communication that's happening right now around employer-assisted housing, or whether it's around additional subsidy in general for the creation of affordable housing, or like we've done as an interim report to the city, recommendation on items that would support the development of affordable housing without subsidy, and that's by amending our ADU, and that's the accessory dwelling unit ordinance, which think of it like the in-law suite on top of your garage. One of the recommendations that we made in the interim due to COVID was the city should fast track their review of that ordinance to make it easier for folks who want to create those units, simply because of the challenges faced with creating, and that's one way that doesn't necessarily require subsidy. So that's just some insight into some of the actions that have taken thus far. The Affordable Housing Coalition is intentionally made up of individuals who work directly in spaces of creation of affordable housing, whether it's habitat, as well as individuals who work in the construction and building and management of affordable housing developments, and those who are in the community. The intention is that we be able to take the community response, the conversation from the community, bring it back, and to shift through real life challenges and hurdles that might come up. So let's say folks say, well, we should just get all the vacant houses in the city and make them open and free to everybody who needs a house. Well, we bring that back to Affordable Housing Coalition. You run into the realistic approach, the folks who build, the folks who invest in development, but it's going to cost X amount of dollars to do this, it's going to cost this. So really to help us to contextualize all those recommendations and then put them in a tiered way to say, okay, these are things we can actually do. And so when we look at the makeup of the coalition, you have people from different backgrounds that will be able to bring that insight to the coalition as a whole. And again, once the recommendations are in a harder sense, you'll see some more community engagement around those, just to make sure that things hadn't been left out before a final recommendation goes to the city council towards the end of the year. And again, COVID's put hiccups in that timeline. So we actually have a meeting tomorrow, and so we'll see if we're still on track to meet those goals. Any questions about that work?
Okay. Thank you, Derwin. Sorry, I got your name wrong there for a minute. I've got a little bigger screen now I can see, but appreciate that update. Any question for Derwin? Okay, great.
So I think, Derwin, I have just one question in the context of the commission, which is, as you know, the commission oversees the work of the continuum of care and trying to make sure that people who become homeless in our community have a pathway back to housing. Is there a way that this body can help either emphasize or accelerate the work that you're doing in the Affordable Housing Coalition? Because as we've discussed multiple times in this group, the lack of housing in our community, particularly as you mentioned for folks below 50% of area median income, is really one of the biggest challenges we have in getting people housed.
So yeah, one of the key areas, as I mentioned, outlined is around aligning and convening advocates in the community for affordable housing. Not much different than the thought of some of the work with the Homeless Commission itself, and that you had people who were doing work in and around homelessness, but the commission allowed that space for people to come together and to align. That's likewise the sense and at the heart of the work of the coalition around the advocacy work is we got people who are concerned about housing, concerned about the lack of level of access across the board for individuals, but not a bunch of alignment in terms of aligning that work to be able to really move the needle. And so part of that is around creating that alignment, convening folks together. And I would say that there's likely a huge role for the folks in the commission to play in that process because of the information data that's known with the target population of individuals who are homeless, those who are at risk of becoming homeless, and how we leverage that information to make sure that there are entry levels and entry points for the population. So that's a long way around. Yes, there's a role.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, great. Any other questions? question for Derwin? All right. Well, thanks again, Derwin. I do appreciate that update. So, Andrea, it looks like the next item is a working group on strategies for COC regarding affordable housing. So I'll turn it to you.
Yep. Okay, great. So to follow up on Derwin's presentation, and then also just to let you know, the operating cabinet, which is the other body in this group that really propels forward our work, has put together a working group on affordable housing to look at what are the most impactful strategies that we could push forward as a continuum of care that would impact our work trying to end homelessness. So that group meets every other Thursday right now at 3. Sorry, I had to think through my calendar today. And if there's anybody on this group that would like to join us, we're meeting today at 3 o'clock this afternoon. And then we'll have a couple more meetings, and our goal is to put together a slate of ideas and policies that we think would have a greater impact on our ability to get people housed at very low incomes. Because one of the challenges that we've seen is it costs as much to develop a unit for somebody whose income is below 50% of area median income as it does for somebody in the mid-income range. So when you have somebody who can afford to pay $1,000 or $1,200 a month in rent, it's very hard to get developers then to want to develop units for folks who can only pay $500 to $600 a month in rent, unless there's other policies or investments that support those developments. So anyways, I just wanted to tell you that we have that work group going. We'd encourage anybody from the commission to join us on that and help develop that slate. And after that work group puts together a plan, it'll come to this body. So you all will see the recommendations of that group for your endorsement, and then are communicating that to our elected officials. So any questions about the work group or any interest in joining us?
Andrew, this is Jim. I'm interested.
Okay.
It's just the schedule.
Right. Okay.
So I may have to miss some, unfortunately, but I'd like to plug into that if I can. I'm not sure about today.
Okay.
But I'd love to plug in as best I can.
Okay, that sounds great. We can always make sure to get you the notes so you know what's happening in that, and then if you have feedback, that would be great.
Right. Okay.
Andrea, I'm kind of in the same boat. I was really interested when the email came out, but I don't know what's happening with my work currently, but I'm like slammed, and I just I wouldn't be able to get to the meetings, and I wouldn't want you counting on me, but I am interested.
Okay. I will add you both and anybody else who wants to the mailing list so you know what's happening, and then you'll also get the notes. And if you can, even if you can't attend a meeting, if you can provide feedback, that would be great.
Sure, thank you.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Anything else, Andrew, on that topic before we turn to Karen?
Nope. I will turn it over to Karen. Karen's going to talk about one of our most exciting sort of venues in terms of how we're increasing the amount of housing we have access to.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Karen, for joining us. Look forward to your update.
Okay, good morning. In the chat box, I put a link. That is like our big dream picture of what we would eventually like to accomplish. As you know, I'm working with Emily Norris of City with Dwellings, but we're doing this project through her church, The Dwelling, so that we can accept donations to do this project. And we've been working in Northwood for the past 87 days now. And in the next week, we should have moved in all 19 people we have scheduled there. So each unit, we've used labor we've paid. It's about $350 for the floor, $200 for the paint, unless they get community volunteers to do the work, and then the owner pays for all the supplies. So it's roughly $1,000 a unit that we've had to pay to turn over. He also owns Garden Court, so we have a unit over there. Ivy Manor, so we have 6 units we're turning over there. And then that same investor is interested in purchasing Lakeside. So we'll do the same model over there. He'll buy the supplies, we'll bring in the community groups to trash them out, and then the the skilled workers to complete the work over there. In addition, at Northwood, we are building a community center. Modern Automotive should be funding it. We went with a $30,000 ask last week, and they told us to come back with a bigger ask. So this community center will have an adult resource center, a community center, and a respite apartment for people coming out of the hospital that need a rest before they can go into shelter. So there'll be a 2-bedroom unit there for that as well. Also at Lakeside, we're only gonna do an adult resource center there since the Boys and Girls Club is right there across the street. We've also worked with Baldwin to create a 12-unit housing project, kind of like the Heart Project over on Anson, that I think Crossnor will be running. And then in addition to working with Baldwin and that investor, I sent him that model with the community first and started sending him lots. And all he wants to do is build tiny home villages. So between me and Lou Baldwin, we're scoping out properties that he can use for that. We found a great 5-acre one that's zoned multifamily and commercial. So hopefully we can get started there soon. And that's it for me.
That's great progress.
Yeah, so Karen's our secret Wonder Woman on our team. But I think one of the things that, I'm most interested in terms of Karen's work is this rehabbing apartments. So as she talked about at Northwood, and she's been doing some research into other communities that have vacant unit, and by vacant, I don't mean like someone was living there last week and they're not this week. I mean, they've been boarded up units. They may have had squatters in them. They may have been offline for years or decades in some cases.
Mhm.
And as she said, it's costing about $1,000 to turn those units over. And that's a much more doable kind of financial investment to either ask of the owner, to ask of, whoever is in control of that property, than it is then to turn around and try and build a unit for $50,000, $60,000, $80,000.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also faster.
Yeah, and we have right now about 300 unique volunteers that we're working with that come and help in shifts to get things done around there. So we've been able to do a lot of beautification projects around the neighborhood too. So Northwood is looking, and the residents say it's feeling better to them. And this project has opened me up to a lot of local investors and national investors. So we were also able to work with somebody to get Salem Crossing, which is huge for our clients because they always want to be there, but that's one of the most difficult places to be. But fortunately for me, the investor, who's the same guy I'm talking to about the tiny houses, he's all about creating communities and keeping those communities. He said over his dead body will he sell anything. So he loves our project, and he pays for all the work to be done on the renovations, and told his local contractor who scopes the properties for him to buy me anything that I would put my people in. So hopefully we'll have more people, more housing coming up, and then he takes care of the work so I can take a break for a little bit, if I even know how.
Yep.
I guess, Andrea, and Karen, my only concern is last time we talked, there's no contractual agreement, right? So
Right.
Investors are putting money in expecting, right, that we'll be able to benefit from that over the long term. And
Mm-hmm.
And I would not want to see those investors disappointed down the road if something changes with the owner of the property not having any kind of contractual obligation to continue to work with us. So I'm not sure what, if anything, needs to be done, but it's just something we need to think about probably.
Yeah.
And definitely outside of the Northwood owner and anything like that, I would absolutely work on a contractual unit. I mean, for us, we built a great relationship with the owner, investor of Northwood, and then hopefully Lakeside. And I mean, I feel comfortable with our relationship. He has no intention on selling. And I've told him, if you want to sell, I have a buyer, so please come to me first. So hopefully, no matter how that goes, that community stays with us and our clients.
Yep. So, and the other thing we're working with Karen on, I think that will help stabilize some of these communities, is trying to get the properties to donate a unit and then for a peer support specialist. And then we're also working on trying to figure out a different crew of people than Karen how to fund peer support specialists so that, unlike the Heart Project, where we have a peer support specialist whose job is defined as supporting this defined group of people, we would ask for peer support specialists to be in there, and we would train them on community advocacy so that they'd be there to support the whole apartment community, including the residents that we're moving in, to make sure that the community continues to grow and develop, and that for anybody we're moving in, there's sort of an early warning system. If they hit a crisis, they've got someone on site keeping an eye on them, but also there to offer them resources and connection back into services.
Absolutely. And we had presented this, or I talked to Neighbors for Better Neighborhoods. So when I go back for the ask for modern automotive, the first time I presented that, they were very interested in that. That's why they said, come back with a bigger ask so we can do bigger on the community center and then include that budget in there, because it's $12,000 for Neighbors for Better Neighborhoods to come in and do this.
So, yep.
Karen, can I ask a quick question? So the link that you put in the chat, that takes you to a community in Texas.
Yeah.
Is there something more local that you guys have website wise, or is there other areas to look? Or
No, that's just something that came up for us, and that's our dream.
oh,
That's
okay.
the model we're looking at.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So there isn't a lot of sort of creative housing models around serving very low income folks in North Carolina. I mean, there's some, but there's not to the scope of this kind of a intentional community. So.
Right.
So, and I'll just also add that we've moved a lot of people in from the medically fragile shelter, and they now work with us to help turn units. They volunteer in the community. They take care of their community and neighbors. You know, they walk elderly to the store. They take care of an elderly person that came in from the medically fragile shelter to make sure her trash is out and she has what she needs. So it's cool that they were in the medically fragile shelter and knew each other and created that community, but then they're now living out in Northwood and expanding that to include everybody that they can, really.
Well, it's great work, Karen. Appreciate
Thank
you
you.
pouring yourself into it. I can tell you're passionate about it.
Thank you. I want to also add that we're getting constant furniture pickups and donations, because as you go into these apartments, some people have one blow-up mattress and that's it. No furniture at all. So not only are we working for our people that we moved in, but for everybody in the community that I've seen that doesn't have anything, we furnish their entire apartment with donations.
Wow. Great. Any other question for Karen? Any other discussion on this topic? All right. So I'm showing next item on their agenda is a data update, and I think Laura's on the phone. I don't see her on the screen here, but I think Laura's with us. Laura, you going to provide that for us? Maybe on mute.
Yeah, Laura, you're muted, but I've also given you screen presentation if you have slides to put up. There you go.
There she comes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. Sorry, my computer's a little slow this morning. So thank you for having me. So yeah, Andrea requested that I present some data on some trends on exits from our programs and housing into permanent housing situations. So what I've done here is I've prepared some one segment of a larger report that is submitted to HUD every year called the System Performance Measures. This report takes a whole year's worth of data on our HUD-funded programs, and it actually a series of metrics that HUD uses to monitor the performance of a continuum of care. So we will be looking at some of the data from the last 5 years, from the last 5 submissions to HUD. Each year's rating application. It is still very much in review and validation mode. Agencies are, going to be reviewing it to make sure that things are accurate, and it will be submitted to HUD probably in March, but there's no telling because COVID has affected everything, even down to submission dates to HUD. So that data will be available in the future. So like I said, today we'll be focusing on one metric from the system performance measures. We're going to be focusing on metric 7B. It's titled Successful Placement in or Retention of Permanent Housing. So like I said, this is a HUD report. So these are HUD's terminology, and I've tried to simplify and put it into regular English as much as possible. But please let me know if you have any questions. So this metric aims to measure 2 things. First, it measures the number of people who have exited from continuum of care programs such as the emergency shelter, transitional housing program, and rapid rehousing program. The second thing this metric measures is the number of people who exited those programs to a permanent housing situation. So what is permanent housing? So HUD considers the following to be permanent housing: a rental unit that somebody is paying for themselves, a rental unit that's being paid for by a continuum of care program through rental assistance, a public housing unit that that person gets to live in, or staying with friends or family on a permanent basis. So those are the most common permanent housing situations. So this is the first part of the metric. This first chart will show the number of people who exited our system from either a shelter, a transitional housing program, or rapid rehousing program in the last 5 years. There are many different positive and negative reasons for why somebody would exit a program. This is simply counting how many exits there were in the respective reporting year. So the first submission year that we did a system performance measure report was in 2015. And that year we had 1,325 people exit one of those programs. The following year, 2016, we had 1,398 people exit one of those reporting years. 2017, we saw a peak in the number of exits that we saw in these programs. There was 1,699 exits. And then the following 2 years, there was a gradual decrease. In 2018, we had 1,568, followed in 2019 with 1,389. So the change in the number of exits throughout these years is similar to the changes in the overall number of people that were served in the entire system throughout these years. There was a peak in the number of people that was served back in 2017. And that's the same peak that we're seeing here in the number of people who exited. Any questions so far? Okay. So this is the same chart, but it's broken up now into the main two types of exits that we can get from this chart. So like I said earlier, this metric measures the number of people who exited and the number of people who exited to a permanent housing situation. So what I've done here is I've just simply also included the number of people who did not exit to a permanent housing situation. That's all that is. So The green represents people who exited to a permanent housing destination. So they were exiting to what we would usually consider a positive, permanent situation, like a rental unit that they are paying for themselves or that is being paid for on their behalf. And then the blue represents people who did not exit to a permanent housing destination. And that could be anything from living with friends and family on a temporary basis. It could include having to go to an institution like a hospital or even being incarcerated. And it includes, it can even include a homeless situation. This is simply the terms that HUD uses to in this metric. That's the way that they split things up.
Laura's Jim, I guess included in that too is probably some percentage of that where we just don't know where they went, right, when they exited.
Yes.
Is that true? Okay.
Yes. That would be particularly true for shelter, just because the sheer nature of the shelters, particularly in our community where we strive to have lower barrier shelters where people can just leave and they don't necessarily have to tell you where they're going. There is going to be a degree of unknown in the data in terms of destination.
Okay, thank you.
So, yeah, that's a good question. Thank you. So again, you'll see that 2017 had another peak. It was the peak in the portion of people who exited to a not permanent housing destination. And the following years, in 2018 and 2019, we saw a smaller portion of people exiting to permanent housing destination, to a non-permanent housing destination. So this is the last slide that I prepared, but if there's any questions or discussion on this data.
I think I heard you say that the pattern we see here kind of follows the same pattern we saw more broadly across the state and maybe even beyond. Is that what I heard you say?
No, what I said was that this pattern in the exits and the fact that there was a peak in 2017 and then a gradual decrease in the following years, it matches the pattern that you would see in a separate report, which it used to be called the AHAR, and it's a report that shows the total number of people who were served in the entire system, right? And when I say system, I'm talking about our Winston-Salem, Forsyth County continuum of care as defined by HUD.
Okay.
And I actually prepared that slide in case somebody asked this question, so give me 1 minute. Sorry, bear with me. So there's another report, like I said, called the AHAR. And the reason I didn't want to include this initially is because it doesn't line up perfectly with the report that I was originally talking about. So the SPM metric that I was originally talking about only includes shelter, transitional housing programs, rapid rehousing programs. And this other report, which is highlighted here in red, it's based off of the AHAR. This is a report that also includes permanent supportive housing programs. And so the number overall, it's going to be a larger number of people because it's including everybody that was served plus everybody that was served in another project type. But you will see that the pattern is similar, and that's really what I was trying to get at, is that we start off a little lower in 2015 with a peak in 2017 and then a decrease. And I think it's just showing the number of people who came to get services by our agencies and the number of people that the agencies were able to serve. That's really what's being represented here.
Okay. Thank you.
Hey, Laura, this is Tim. I see something maybe interesting is I know you were presenting some other data yesterday or the day before, and it showed that we had a long time for people to get, that it took a long time for people to get housing. And I want to say it was in 2017, and this just shows just a rank large number of persons experiencing homelessness in that period of time. So I wonder if the system didn't peak in activity then, and maybe that's why it was taking longer for people to get housed. Of course, I know there could be plenty of other variables. Like we didn't have Karen then, for example, but just something I noticed in the data.
Yeah, it'd be good to look at that all together. But the report that really highlights length of time in the way that you're talking about only reflects length of time for persons in our shelters, and it doesn't. So it kind of it's not an equal. It's a sort of apples and oranges, unfortunately. But we can definitely look into it and see if we can come up with a better comparison. Because you're right, like there is a lot of changes in the length of time that it takes for somebody to get housed. For sure.
Thanks.
Well, Laura, it looked like the percentage was increasing, which is a good thing, right? On the percentage going into permanent housing, right? Exiting. So that green bar was taller in relation to the blue in that last couple of years, it looked like, if I remember right.
There was an increase in the number of people who exited to a permanent housing destination in 2018.
Yeah, but
And,
then as a total is coming down, the relatively, you're seeing a greater percentage of people exiting to permanent housing destinations, right? Closer to not quite half at 619 as a proportion of 1389 is much better than what we saw in 17 and prior.
Right. Yeah, so there's less people being served, potentially more people being housed. One of the things we should look at next is the speed to housing in relation to this metric.
Good
Yeah,
information.
but I see what Jim is saying is that if you just look at the permanent housing placements over time, more people are getting permanently housed as a raw number, but also as a percentage of the whole of people who exit the system, which is also good.
Right.
This data is great. I'm interested in the stories behind the people in blue. You know, what keeps people homeless, and also how it relates to the earlier topic today. Does the supply of housing keep people in blue, keep them homeless? I would really, usually we like data and not anecdotes. One thing I like about our website, Andrea, is that you have had some stories of people there in the past. And I know our frontline folks, Derwin, I think, has dropped off the call, but a lot of our frontline folks know these stories. I'm sure Karen knows them. I see some of the ones that she tells. But I would really like to know what's behind those numbers.
Yeah.
And how we can get at it. And is it just supply of housing? I think that's a lot of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's limitations in what you can get out of our current database. And from talking to case managers, I learn a lot about the difficulties that they are experiencing in finding housing for folks. And I think that is information that should definitely be included when we present data, because there's only so much that the data can say.
Yep. So, well, you'll be happy to know on next month's agenda, I'm hoping to have one of the case managers come and talk with us about what the challenges they're seeing and speak more about what they're seeing for the folks that they're trying to serve. from a more qualitative perspective.
Yeah, that will be interesting.
Yep.
Okay, great. Is there anything else, Laura, that you were going to cover? I think you said this was your last slide you had prepared.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, Andrea, I'm not sure if you had anything else you wanted to cover with the group.
I think there's just one heads up. So just partially because of the way the month fell, this meeting is coming before the operating cabinet meeting. Typically, we try and have this meeting after that meeting, so things that come up in that meeting we can bring to this meeting. So this is a heads up. One of the things that's going to be discussed at the operating cabinet meeting next week is a twofold problem. One is the growing number of people that we're seeing on the streets. So our street outreach committee has been working really hard at trying to get a much better and firmer number of how many people are sleeping outside. Right now, it's looking like it's going to be something over 200 folks. And that number's been growing throughout the pandemic. At the same time, we're heading into winter. And what we know about how to keep people safe through COVID isn't going to lend well to having a winter overflow shelter in the way that we typically have. So the operating cabinet on Tuesday will be discussing what plans and recommendations we want to put forward for how to address folks who need shelter but can't access it over the winter months. So one conversation we're having is about a white flag shelter, which would be a very large, mostly warming type shelter, where when nights are below a certain temperature, we would open that and people could come in to get warm, but it wouldn't necessarily be a full overflow like we've run in the past. Some of the challenges, for as long as I remember, the overflows have been always run in partnership with our faith communities, where we've used faith community facilities to house groups of between 20, depending on what the state building code has been, between 20 and 50 folks in a church. But because of the pandemic, most churches are closed. Many of them are not comfortable hosting overflow shelters this winter. So we're trying to figure out what's the best recommendation for how to keep people safe and comfortable through the winter months. So you may hear more about that recommendation off schedule, about how we move that recommendation forward into the community, to both the city and the county and to the broader community for support to do that. So.
Yeah, I guess we missed the worst of it, right? With the timing in March when things started locking down this past year. So it'll be a different kind of winter this time.
Yeah, it's going to be a very different kind of winter. And we're seeing infection rates rise. So we have right now, just so you all know, we have 8 people in the COVID positive shelter. Now, that doesn't mean they're all positive. It means they've all either been a known exposure or awaiting test results. We had one shelter with an outbreak. And I still don't have the test results to know how many people were affected, but they had at least 3 staff and 3 guests who tested positive out of a 23 bed program. So,
Andrea, I know City with Dwellings is one of the major overflow shelters, usually, right? You know what? I know they've been thinking about this since last spring.
Yeah. So one thing that they've been funded to do is open a 40-unit hotel shelter that's targeting long-term homeless with severe and persistent mental illness from the streets. And these are the core folks that come stay with them during overflow season. And so they'll be able to provide that group of people hotel rooms that they'll support and manage through the winter. And they're also the ones who are putting on the table the proposal for a white flag warming shelter.
But those
And
folks, that's over and above the 200 that you're talking about, right?
So the 40 folks that would go into their hotel style shelter would be off of the streets. So they would come out of that 200 on the streets. The warming shelter would then also help serve some of those folks. So the other thing we're trying to figure out, so before the craziness of the pandemic started, Cities with Dwellings did a lot of digging into who they were serving in overflow. And what they kind of figured out over time is although they were serving between 200 and 250 folks per winter in overflow, most of those people were people who, had they gotten intervention early in their homelessness, could have been rehoused very quickly. So they've developed a team that is going to be doing diversion and prevention and trying to catch people very early and get them back into housing, and then support them in addressing whatever their housing crisis is, but from a housed perspective. And then, based on what they've seen over the last 5 years, there's about a core group of about 40 folks who come in at the beginning of overflow season and have nowhere else to go and leave homeless at the end of overflow season, and then come back the next overflow season. So that's really how they came up with that target number of 40 for the hotel, is that these are the people who keep coming back year after year after year, and really trying to put them in a hotel, build a community with them, similar to what we're doing with medically fragile, so that the end goal is that by March we will have had enough time and enough work that we can exit folks to housing as opposed to back to the street. And we know with this crew that's been pretty hardcore street homeless, we're not going to be 100% successful, but hopefully it'll be more successful than we've been with just an overflow style shelter.
Do you think these warming centers will be like outdoor tent type things, or do you have any idea what?
So I think everything's on the table at the moment. And that's part of the challenge of having the operating cabinet meeting after this meeting, is
Sure.
I know that we've talked about tents, we've talked about trying to find a large building that we could use. Some of it is trying to match the state building code. So I have to do a little more research into the state building code, because my recollection of it is different than some other folks. But if we do an overflow sleeping shelter, we are limited by the state building code to 20 people per site. So to serve 200 folks, that's 10 sites, which is a lot of staff, a lot of coordination and management. And so we're trying to figure out, how do we manage this many folks who may need to come in for shelter, and do it in a way that that's manageable and affordable, and isn't pulling so many resources from the efforts that we're trying to use to get people housed.
Right. I just bring up the tents because I've been hearing a lot of the restaurants, that's what they're moving towards, to try and maintain some outdoor seating over the winter. And apparently there's fierce competition for all those types of supplies. Like, they're really, really hard to get now.
Okay. That's a good point. Yeah.
Warming things, and like, they're apparently really tough to get a hold of.
Okay. That's a good, I will bring that information to.
So Andrew, I guess that'll be a topic for our next meeting. I mean, that's
Yes.
a pretty big topic.
Yep, it'll be a topic for our next meeting. It may also, you may hear some stuff in between meetings about it.
Okay.
So, yep.
Okay.
So that's all I have for today.
Okay, great. Was there anything anyone else has before we?
Hey, hi, this is Dan. I've got a quick question. And it's, I'm always looking ahead to the, what's happening in, a year or 2 years. And it's just food for thought that potentially, after this COVID crisis is beyond us, how many of us have given thought to, or we ought to be thinking about how this will impact housing and housing needs, particularly with evictions and things that might be ramping up again. And I just was thinking today as I was getting ready for the day and coming into this meeting, saying, you know, what do we look at in a year or, you know, 18 months, 24 months down the line? Anyway, I just bring it up, not necessarily for input, but things to consider for the agenda, that while the crisis is really capturing all of our attention and energy right now, and stress and all these other things, that, you know, there will be a time beyond it that will create its own new stresses and crises. And so if we can stay ahead of it, come up with potentially a plan to address some suspected problems, we may get ahead of the curve, and it will assist not only our efforts, but those that we serve.
Yep. Yes, no, that is definitely something we've been trying to keep our eye on, is evictions. So I will put the information about what's happening and what we are projecting will happen with evictions on a future agenda too. So thank you, Dan, for mentioning that. Anything else?
All right. Well, thanks to all. And I guess we'll, I know I'll try to plug in as best I can. As I said earlier, I know Susan was trying to do the same thing for the housing meetings that you're putting on the calendar. So look forward to learning more about that. But appreciate everybody joining, and look forward to seeing the group next time.
Yes, thank you so much. You too.
See you.
Bye.
Have a good day.
Bye, everybody.